had spent days preparing for my husband's company celebration. It wasn't just a work event. It marked the culmination of a major acquisition, and my husband, David, had played a leading role. He insisted I come looking elegant but modest, which I interpreted as his way of saying, "Don't steal the spotlight." Still, I wore a navy blue dress and fixed my hair with care. I knew no one there would remember what I wore, but I wanted to feel like I belonged. "Catherine, are you almost ready?" David called from downstairs, impatience lacing his voice. "We can't be late tonight." "Just a minute," I replied, applying a final touch of lipstick. I studied my reflection in the bedroom mirror. At 42, I still looked good. Not that anyone at these corporate events ever truly saw me. To them, I was just David's wife, the woman who raised their children while he climbed the corporate ladder at Sterling Financial. I descended the stairs, handbag clutched tightly. David barely glanced at me before checking his watch. Finally, the car's waiting. During the ride to the Westbrook Hotel, David rehearsed his speech. I'd heard it 6 times already, but I nodded appreciatively at all the right moments. That's what good wives do, right? Support from the shadows. After 15 years of marriage, I'd perfected the art of being the silent partner. "This deal with Axis Corporation will put me next in line for CFO," he said, straightening his tie. "Just don't talk too much about the kids tonight. These people want to hear about business, innovation, market growth, not Tommy's soccer game or Emma's science project." I bit my tongue. Our children's accomplishments were my life's work, but tonight wasn't about me. It never was. The Westbrook's grand ballroom sparkled with crystal chandeliers and floor-to-ceiling windows overlooking Boston's twinkling skyline. Men in tailored suits and women in designer dresses mingled, their laughter echoing off marble columns. A waiter offered champagne as we entered, and I gratefully accepted a glass. Liquid courage. "David, there you are!" A tall man with silver hair approached, clapping my husband on the shoulder. The man of the hour. "Richard, good to see you," David beamed, shaking his hand vigorously. "This is my wife, Catherine." Richard nodded briefly in my direction before launching into industry talk. I stood there, smiling politely, until they moved toward a group of executives. David, never looking back to see if I followed. I didn't. Instead, I drifted toward the edge of the room, sipping my champagne slowly. This was familiar territory. The corporate spouse, beautiful but silent backdrop to the real players. I watched as other wives broke into small clusters, discussing vacation homes and private schools. I recognized a few faces from previous events, but couldn't recall their names. They'd never bothered to remember mine either. First time, a woman with short auburn hair appeared beside me, her smile warm and genuine. "No, I've been to dozens of these," I replied. "But it always feels like the first time." She laughed. "I'm Claire. My husband's in accounting." "Catherine. My husband's the one gesturing wildly by the ice sculpture." "Ah, David Miller. Everyone's talking about him tonight." Claire raised her glass in a small toast. "You must be proud." Was I? I nodded automatically. "Very." "What do you do, Catherine?" The dreaded question. "I'm at home with our children," I said, then felt compelled to add, "I used to work in business development before they were born." Claire's eyes lit up. "Really? Which company?" Before I could answer, the lights dimmed slightly, and the CEO took the stage. The crowd hushed as he welcomed everyone and began praising the acquisition team. David stood tall, chest puffed with pride as his name was mentioned repeatedly. I watched from a distance, feeling strangely detached. When David took the microphone, he spoke confidently about market strategies and growth potential, using terminology that once felt familiar to me. Years ago, I'd understood these conversations, Intimately. I'd graduated top of my class from Wharton, had job offers from 3 major firms. Then I'd met David, fallen in love, and chosen a different path. As spouses introduced themselves around me, I heard titles exchanged like currency: doctors, professors, entrepreneurs. When my turn came, I simply said, "I'm Catherine, David's wife." Their eyes would glaze over, conversations shifting away from me like water around a stone. I found myself standing near a large photograph of Sterling Financial's board of directors. 12 men in dark suits. Not a single woman. I remembered when diversity had been a hot topic at these events, how the men would talk about finding qualified women as if they were rare exotic birds. I'd stopped mentioning my own qualifications years ago when I realized it made David uncomfortable. "More champagne, ma'am?" A server appeared at my elbow. "Please," I said, exchanging my empty glass for a full one. I drifted through the crowd, catching snippets of conversation about stock options and retirement packages. Nobody asked about my day or my thoughts. Nobody wondered about the woman behind David Miller's success. I was furniture, elegant, necessary, but ultimately unremarkable. As dinner was announced, I found my assigned seat at David's table, positioned between the wife of a vice president and an elderly board member who immediately turned to speak with the person on his other side. David was deep in conversation across the table, completely oblivious to my isolation. I toyed with my salad and wondered how I'd become this person, this shadow of the ambitious young woman I once was. Had it happened gradually, or was there a moment when I'd consciously decided to make myself smaller for David's comfort? The evening stretched on, speeches blending into toasts, blending into polite laughter. I smiled when appropriate, nodded when expected, and remained the perfect corporate wife. But something inside me was stirring, a restlessness I hadn't felt in years. As the formal program concluded and dessert was served, I watched David accept congratulations from colleagues, his face flushed with success and champagne. He was in his element, and I realized with sudden clarity that I was not. But as the night would soon reveal, elements can change in the most unexpected ways. As the formal speeches concluded and informal chatter resumed, David took the microphone again for a brief toast. He was relaxed now, tipsy with success and champagne. He thanked his colleagues, praised the leadership team, and then turned toward me with a smirk. I smiled, expecting a gesture of appreciation. Instead, his voice rang loud and clear. "And to my lovely wife, the most committed housekeeper I know. She runs our home like a Fortune 500 company, but without the salary." The laughter that erupted shook the chandelier above. People howled. One man even spilled his drink laughing. Women glanced at me, some giggling behind their hands. I stood there, trying not to blink too much, trying not to let the redness in my cheeks betray the lump rising in my throat. My hands trembled as I gripped the base of my champagne glass. In those few seconds, years of silent support, sacrifice, and strength were reduced to a punchline. She even prepared a PowerPoint for our vacation planning last summer, David continued, warming to his audience. "Complete with ROI analysis for Disneyland versus the Grand Canyon." More laughter, louder now. The room spun slightly as I took a deep breath. Claire, my new acquaintance, shot me a sympathetic glance from across the room, but quickly looked away when our eyes met. I recognized that look, pity mixed with relief that she wasn't in my shoes. Richard, the silver-haired executive, slapped David on the back. "Well, someone's got to make sure the trains run on time at home, right? To the unsung heroes." He raised his glass in a mock salute that felt more like a dismissal than an honor. I forced a smile that felt like a grimace. 15 years of supporting David, of raising our children while he traveled for business, of hosting dinner parties for his colleagues, of editing his presentations late into the night, all reduced to a caricature of a fussy housekeeper. "Thank you, David, for that colorful tribute," the CEO said, taking back the microphone with a chuckle. "I think we all appreciate the backbone of home support that allows our executives to focus on business." David rejoined me at our table, loosening his tie with an air of satisfaction. "Good one, huh?" he whispered, kissing my cheek. Everyone loved it. I couldn't speak. The words stuck in my throat like thorns. "Oh, come on, Kath, it was a joke," he said, registering my silence. "Don't be so sensitive." "Excuse me," I managed, standing up. "I need some air." I walked toward the ballroom doors, aware of eyes following me. My heels clicked against the marble floor, each step a small rebellion against the suffocating atmosphere. Outside in the corridor, I leaned against the cool wall and closed my eyes. "He doesn't mean it, you know." I turned to see an older woman watching me, elegant in a crimson dress. I recognized her as Martha Winters, wife of the company's founder, now retired. "Men like them," she continued, gesturing toward the ballroom. "They don't understand what we do, what we sacrifice." "Is that supposed to make me feel better?" I asked, my voice steadier than I expected. She smiled ruefully. "No, but sometimes it helps to know you're not alone." She patted my arm gently before walking away, her perfume lingering in the air. I stood there for several minutes, collecting myself. Through the partially open doors, I could hear the party continuing, David's laugh particularly distinct among the voices. I checked my reflection in a nearby mirror, fixed my lipstick, and walked back inside with as much dignity as I could muster. No one commented on my brief absence. David was in deep conversation with the board chairman, his expression serious and engaged. I circulated through the crowd mechanically, accepting refills on my champagne, making small talk about Boston's weather and traffic. Inside, I was crumbling, but no one would ever know. "Your husband's quite the character," a woman said, cornering me by the dessert table. Her name tag identified her as Jennifer from marketing. "Such a funny guy." "Yes, he has a unique sense of humor," I replied, selecting a chocolate-covered strawberry I had no intention of eating. "My husband could never get away with jokes like that," she continued, lowering her voice conspiratorially. "I'd murder him in his sleep." I laughed, a hollow sound that surprised even me. "The night's still young." Her eyes widened slightly before she realized I was joking. Or was I? "Well, I admire your patience," she said, backing away slightly. "It takes a special woman to support a man like David." Special, patient, supportive. The adjectives women like me collected instead of promotions and bonuses. I'd once been described as brilliant, ambitious, unstoppable. Now I was just accommodating. As I moved through the crowd, I caught fragments of conversation about me, completely dedicated to those kids. Gave up quite a promising career. David's rock, you know. Each comment felt like a small paper cut, nothing fatal, but collectively wearing away at my sense of self. I'd allowed my identity to be so completely subsumed by David's that even I sometimes forgot who Catherine Miller had been before she became Mrs. David Miller. I found myself near a large window overlooking the city. Boston's skyline glittered. Against the night sky, lights from office buildings where people made decisions, implemented strategies, built careers. I pressed my palm against the cool glass, suddenly longing for that world with an intensity that frightened me. "Ladies and gentlemen, the casino tables are now open in the adjacent room," announced a voice over the speaker system. "Please enjoy the rest of your evening." People began to migrate toward the promised entertainment. David appeared at my side, his hand possessive on my lower back. "There you are," he said, his words slightly slurred. "The guys are heading to the blackjack tables. You okay to mingle? With the wives for a bit? The wives. As if we were a separate species, incapable of conversation beyond children and home decor. Actually, I was thinking of heading home, I said quietly. I have a headache. David frowned. We can't leave now, Kath. This is important networking time. Take an aspirin or something. You stay, I suggested. I'll get a cab. His frown deepened. Don't be ridiculous. You're overreacting to a harmless joke. A joke at my expense, David. In front of everyone who matters to you. Jesus, Catherine, he hissed, drawing me further away from nearby guests. Can you think about someone besides yourself for once? This night is crucial for my career. The irony of his accusation struck me like a physical blow. I'd spent 15 years thinking of everyone but myself. Of him, of our children, of his reputation. I'd erased myself so thoroughly that even he couldn't see me anymore. You know what? You're right, I said, surprising us both with my calm tone. I'll stay. Go enjoy your game. Relief flooded his face. That's my girl. I'll find you later. My girl, like a pet or a possession, not a partner. I watched him join a group of men heading toward the casino room, never looking back to see if I was okay. The women were gathering near the bar, voices high and brittle as they compared notes on schools and summer plans. I moved toward them automatically, playing my assigned role in this corporate theater. But inside, something had changed. The woman who had walked into this ballroom, dutiful, invisible, accommodating, was not the same woman who now stood watching her husband disappear into a crowd of his peers. That woman had finally had enough. As the crowd continued to laugh, I slowly walked toward the back of the ballroom, my heels clicking with the heaviness of humiliation. David didn't notice, or didn't care, that I had left the center of the room. I stood alone near the exit, watching the crowd as they moved on, still smiling, still blind to the sting of what had happened. The casino room was filled with excited chatter and the distinctive sound of chips being shuffled across felt tables. I lingered at its entrance, watching David throw himself into a poker game with Richard and several board members. He was animated, expansive, completely in his element. The man I'd married had been ambitious but kind, thoughtful, grateful for my support. This man, this stranger in an expensive suit, I barely recognized. Champagne, ma'am? A server paused, beside me with a tray of bubbling flutes. No, thank you. Scotch. Neat, if you have it. He nodded and returned moments later with an amber-filled tumbler. I took a sip, savoring the smoky burn. My father had taught me to appreciate good Scotch when I was 22 and had just landed my first corporate job at Mercer Strategic Partners. Success tastes like this, he'd said, clinking his glass against mine. Never forget it. I had forgotten, though. I'd forgotten so many things about myself. No one came after me. Not even the women who had smiled at me earlier. I was invisible again. But this time, I preferred it. I stood in front of a gilded mirror near the coat check and barely recognized the woman staring back. Her mascara was perfect. Her dress was elegant. But her heart had just cracked open in a room full of strangers. Are you all right? The coat check attendant, a young woman with kind eyes, watched me with concern. I'm fine, I replied automatically, the universal female response to pain. You don't look fine, she said, then blushed. I'm sorry. That was unprofessional. I laughed softly. No, it was honest. I appreciate honest. She hesitated, then said, There's a small lounge through that door if you need a moment alone. I thanked her and slipped through the indicated doorway into a plush sitting room designed for ladies who needed to repair makeup or adjust stockings. It was empty, blessedly quiet after the noise of the ballroom. I sank onto a velvet sofa and pulled out my phone. 3 texts from Emma, our 15-year-old. How's the party? Did Dad's speech go okay? Is he going to be home for my debate tomorrow? 1 from Tommy, 13, and already too cool to text his mother except in emergencies. The Wi-Fi's out again. Can I reset the router? Ordinary questions from my extraordinary children. Children who had never seen the Catherine who graduated top of her class, who had 3 job offers before commencement, who had once been described in the Boston Business Journal as a rising star to watch. I texted Emma back. Party's fine. Dad's speech went well. He'll be there tomorrow. Love you. To Tommy. Go ahead. Did you finish your science project? Then I sent 1 more text to a number I hadn't used in years. Just 3 words. Are you available? The response came within seconds. For you, always, call me. I stepped out into a quiet corridor and dialed. My hand was steady now, the trembling from earlier replaced by a strange calm. Catherine Miller. It's been too long. The voice was warm, familiar, despite the years since we'd last spoken. Hello, Marcus. I need your help. Marcus Chen had been my mentor at Mercer, then my colleague, then my friend. When I'd left to focus on family, he'd been the only one who'd told me I was making a mistake. The business world needs women like you, he'd said. Don't let yourself disappear. I'd been offended then. Now I understood. Name it, he said without hesitation. I need information on Sterling Financial's acquisition of Axis Corporation. Everything you can find, especially about who's really behind Axis. That's your husband's deal, isn't it? Yes. Catherine, what's going on? I took a deep breath. Reclamation. There was a pause, then a chuckle. About damn time. Give me 30 minutes. I ended the call and returned to the mirror. The woman reflected there looked different somehow, her eyes sharper, her posture straighter. For the rest of the evening, I lingered in silence. I didn't cry. I didn't scream. I just observed. Something inside me was shifting. The woman who had dedicated herself to her family was still here, but she was about to stop letting others define her worth. I rejoined the party, moving through the crowd with new purpose. I accepted another scotch when a server offered, sipping it slowly, as I watched David lose spectacularly at blackjack. His face was flushed, his laughter too loud. He didn't even notice when I stood directly in his line of sight. Mrs. Miller. A hotel staff member approached me discreetly. There's a delivery for you at the front desk. I followed her through the lobby to the reception area, where a courier waited with a sealed envelope. I signed for it, tipped generously, and found a quiet corner to examine its contents. Inside was a USB drive and a note in Marcus's familiar scrawl. As requested, this is bigger than you think. Call me after you review. I slipped the drive into my purse, just as my phone buzzed with another text from him. Room 512 is available if you need privacy. Keycard is with concierge under your maiden name. My maiden name, Catherine Blackwell. A name I hadn't used professionally in 15 years. A name that still meant something in certain circles. At the concierge desk, I said simply, I believe you have something for Catherine Blackwell. The concierge's eyes widened slightly in recognition. Yes, Miss Blackwell, right away. He handed me a key card with exaggerated respect. In room 512, I found a laptop waiting on the desk. I inserted the USB drive and began reading through the files Marcus had compiled. Financial reports, ownership structures, board minutes, press, releases, all documenting the complex relationship between Sterling Financial and Axis Corporation. But most importantly, documentation of who actually owned the controlling interest in Axis. I read the name twice to be sure. Then I laughed, a real laugh, full and genuine, for what felt like the first time in years. My phone rang. Marcus again. "Did you review the material?" he asked without preamble. I did. It's illuminating. Your father kept this very quiet. Only a handful of people know Blackwell Holdings is behind Axis. My father, James Blackwell, had built one of the most successful private equity firms on the East Coast. When he died 3 years ago, the company had passed to my mother, and, on paper at least, to me. I had remained a silent partner, attending quarterly meetings, but letting the executive team handle day-to-day operations while I focused on family. David has no idea, I said quietly. That's clear from his public statements about the acquisition. He thinks Sterling is absorbing Axis. In reality, we're absorbing them. The irony was delicious. My husband had spent months structuring a deal that he believed would cement his position at Sterling, never realizing he was actually negotiating with my family's firm. The board is announcing the full terms tomorrow morning, Marcus continued, including the leadership changes. Who's taking over as CEO? That's up to you, Catherine. Your mother made it very clear. This is your decision now. I stared out the window at the Boston skyline, the same view I'd gazed at earlier with such longing. The corporate world I'd stepped away from was suddenly within reach again. All I had to do was claim it. I need to think, I said. Don't think too long. The announcement is scheduled for 9 a.m. I ended the call and sat in silence, considering my options. I could remain in the shadows, letting someone else take the helm of the combined companies, or I could step forward and reclaim the career I'd set aside, and in the process, show David and everyone else at Sterling exactly who they'd been dismissing all these years. The choice wasn't really a choice at all. I returned to the party, moving through the crowd with newfound confidence. People noticed. I caught curious glances, raised eyebrows. I smiled pleasantly, offered small talk, but inside I was calculating, planning, preparing. The evening that had started with humiliation was about to end very differently. I found David at the bar, loosening his tie further as he ordered another drink. "There you are," he said when he spotted me. "Ready to go? I'm beat." "Actually," I replied, "I think we should stay a bit longer. I have a feeling the night is about to get interesting." As the event began to wind down, the atmosphere shifted. A hush fell across the room when the CFO took the stage once more. He cleared his throat and smiled nervously. "Before we conclude the evening, there's one more announcement to make," he said. "We're honored to introduce the new CEO of the company, effective immediately." There was confusion. Whispers filled the air. David straightened in his seat, clearly puzzled. He wasn't expecting any leadership changes tonight. Then, the doors at the back opened, and I stepped forward. I felt David's eyes on me instantly, confusion clouding his features. "Catherine, what are you doing?" I squeezed his shoulder gently. "Just wait." The CFO, Gerald Matthews, adjusted his glasses and continued. "As many of you know, our acquisition of Axis Corporation represents a significant milestone for Sterling Financial. What you may not know is that Axis has been a subsidiary of Blackwell Holdings for the past 5 years. The name Blackwell rippled through the crowd. Even in Boston's business circles, the Blackwell name carried weight. My father had built his empire quietly but formidably, preferring to operate behind the scenes rather than in the spotlight, much like I had done in my own home. "And now," Gerald continued, "we're pleased to announce that as part of this merger, leadership will be restructured under the direction of Blackwell Holdings representative." David gripped my arm. "What's happening? Did you know about this?" I didn't answer. I was watching Gerald, who was now looking directly at me. Ms. Catherine Blackwell Miller will be assuming the role of CEO, effective tomorrow morning. A gasp spread through the room. Faces turned pale. Laughter died mid-breath. I walked up to the stage with grace, holding the board's official letter in my hand. I could feel David's stunned gaze following me, could practically hear the gears turning in his head as he processed what was happening. As I took my place at the podium, I allowed myself one brief moment to survey the room. Richard, who had laughed the loudest at David's joke, was ashen-faced. The women who had dismissed me hours earlier were whispering frantically to each other. And David, my husband, who had reduced me to a punchline, sat frozen, his champagne glass suspended halfway to his lips. "Thank you, Gerald," I said, my voice steady. The microphone carried my words clearly across the now silent ballroom. "I appreciate your introduction, though I admit the timing is somewhat unorthodox." Nervous laughter rippled through the audience. They were off balance, uncertain how to react. For those who don't know me, which I suspect is most of you, allow me to introduce myself properly. I'm Catherine Blackwell Miller. Many of you know me as David's wife. I paused, letting the irony sink in. But before that, I was Catherine Blackwell, senior strategist at Mercer Partners and daughter of James Blackwell, founder of Blackwell Holdings. I caught sight of Martha Winters, the company founder's wife who had spoken to me in the hallway earlier. She was smiling now, a knowing glint in her eye as she raised her glass slightly in my direction. "The acquisition you've been celebrating tonight is indeed cause for celebration, but perhaps not for the reasons you thought. Sterling Financial isn't absorbing Axis Corporation. Blackwell Holdings through Axis is merging with Sterling. The board voted unanimously this afternoon to approve the leadership change." David had risen to his feet now, his face cycling through emotions: confusion, disbelief, anger. He moved toward the stage, but Richard placed a restraining hand on his arm, whispering something that made him sink back into his chair. "I realize this comes as a surprise to many of you," I continued, including my husband. I allowed myself a small smile. "David and I will have much to discuss later. But for now, I want to assure everyone that this transition will be handled with the utmost professionalism. No immediate staffing changes are planned, though there will naturally be some restructuring in the coming months." The room remained silent, dozens of eyes fixed on me with a mixture of shock, fear, and, most gratifyingly, newfound respect. I've spent the past 15 years raising our children and supporting my husband's career. During that time, I also served quietly on the board of Blackwell Holdings, keeping my business acumen sharp and my market knowledge current. I never stopped being the woman who graduated top of her class at Wharton, even if that's not the version of me you've come to. No. From the corner of my eye, I spotted Marcus Chen slipping into the back of the ballroom. He gave me a subtle thumbs up. Having my old mentor there felt right. A connection to the Catherine I used to be, now merged with the Catherine I had become. The first official board meeting under the new structure will take place Monday morning at 9. Department heads, you'll receive briefing packets by email tomorrow. I look forward to working with all of you as we begin this new chapter. I stepped away from the microphone, ignoring the stunned silence that followed me. Gerald quickly retook the stage, thanking everyone for attending and officially closing the evening. As if on cue, the band began playing again, though few people seemed interested in dancing now. I made my way through the crowd, accepting brief handshakes and stunned congratulations with gracious nods. Claire, the woman I'd met earlier, rushed up to me with wide eyes. You're a Blackwell?" she stammered. "Why didn't you say anything?" "Would it have mattered?" I asked gently. "An hour ago, I was just David's wife." She had the grace to look embarrassed. Jennifer from marketing approached next, her earlier condescension replaced by eager friendliness. Mrs. Miller, or should I say Ms. Blackwell Miller. I just wanted to say how excited I am to work with you. I've actually been developing a campaign targeting female investors that I'd love to share with you sometime. Email. Me on Monday, I said, neither cold nor warm. And Catherine is fine. As I worked my way toward David, who stood rigidly by the bar, Richard intercepted me. Catherine, he said, his earlier dismissiveness gone. This is unexpected. Is it? I asked. Or did you simply never bother to see me? He flushed deeply. I apologize for any misunderstandings earlier. Your husband's joke was in poor taste. Yes, it was, I agreed. But illuminating. Finally, I reached David. His face was a storm of emotions. Anger, confusion, embarrassment, and something else I couldn't quite place. Respect, perhaps? Or fear? You've been busy, he said tightly. So have you, I replied. Negotiating with my family's company without ever realizing it. That's quite an oversight for someone so detail-oriented. You never told me. You never asked. I cut him off. Not once in 15 years did you ask about my family's business, about what I did before we met, about what I might want beyond being your wife and the children's mother. Around us, people were pretending not to listen while straining to catch every word. We should discuss this at home, David said, his jaw clenched. We will, I agreed. But first, I need to finish here. The car will be waiting for you out front if you'd like to go ahead. It was a dismissal, the kind he'd given me countless times over the years. He recognized it immediately, his face darkening. I'll wait, he said stiffly. Suit yourself. I turned away to greet a board member who was hovering nearby, leaving David standing alone, a novel experience for him. The night that had begun with my invisibility was ending with me at the center of everyone's attention. It wasn't about revenge, though the symmetry was undeniably satisfying. It was about reclamation, of my identity, my power, my voice. As I moved through the crowd, accepting congratulations and fielding questions, I caught sight of my reflection, again in one of the ballroom's ornate mirrors. The woman who gazed back at me stood tall, her eyes clear and focused, her smile genuine. She looked like a stranger, yet somehow more familiar than the reflection I'd seen earlier that evening. She looked like me. The real me finally stepped out of the shadows. As I stood behind the microphone, I spoke with a calm I had not known I possessed. I told the story of my upbringing in a family of entrepreneurs. I explained how I had stepped away from the business world to raise our children, but I never stopped learning. I took remote courses. I advised quietly from behind the curtain. I invested wisely. The drive home was silent. David white-knuckled the steering wheel, his profile rigid in the darkness. The Boston streets slid past, illuminated in flashes by streetlights that revealed his clenched jaw, his furrowed brow. 15 years, he finally said as we turned onto Beacon Hill. 15 years and I never knew. You never asked, I repeated, gazing out the window at the elegant brownstones of our neighborhood. You assumed you knew everything about me there was to know. Your father. My father respected my choice, to focus on our family, I said. He never pressured me to return to Blackwell Holdings, but he also never stopped including me in the company's decisions. I've been on the board since before we met. That's impossible, David muttered. I would have known. Would you? I turned to face him. When was the last time you asked me about my day? My thoughts, my dreams? You created a narrative about me that suited you, David. The dutiful wife, the perfect mother, the woman with no ambitions beyond supporting yours. We pulled into the driveway of our federal-style home. The porch light was on. Mrs. Reynolds, our housekeeper, always left it burning when we were out late. The irony wasn't lost on me. "The children," he began, "are asleep," I finished for him. "And they will still have both parents who love them, regardless of what happens next." Inside, the house was quiet. David headed straight for the liquor cabinet, pouring himself a generous scotch without offering me one. I slipped off my heels and padded to the kitchen for a glass of water. "Were you ever going to tell me?" he asked, following me. I was waiting. "For you to see me," I said simply. "To really see me." He ran a hand through his hair, disheveling the perfect coif he'd spent so long on before the party. "And now what? You're going to run Sterling? My company?" "Our company," I corrected him. "And yes, that's exactly what I'm going to do." "You've been out of the business world for 15 years. I laughed softly. "No, David. I've been out of your sight for 15 years. I've remained very much in the business world." I opened my laptop on the kitchen counter and typed in my password. "Here," I said, turning the screen toward him. "Quarterly reports I've prepared for Blackwell Holdings. Market analyses I've conducted. Investment strategies I've developed. All while you thought I was just planning children's birthday parties and organizing the linen closet." He scrolled through the documents, his face growing paler. "These are comprehensive." "I'm very good at what I do," I said without arrogance. It was simply a fact. "I always have been. Why didn't you tell me?" His voice had lost its edge, confusion replacing anger. "At first, because you seemed intimidated by my background. You made little comments about trust fund babies and family connections. You were so proud of being self-made. Then, after the children came, it was easier to let you believe I'd let it all go. You were comfortable with that narrative." He drained his scotch. "So this whole time, while I thought you were just a housewife?" I supplied the words he couldn't bring himself to say. "That's the box you put me in, David, not me." He slumped onto a bar stool, suddenly looking older than his 45 years. "I made a joke about you being a housekeeper," he said quietly, "in front of everyone." "Yes, you did." "And hours later, you're announced as my boss." "Life has a way of balancing things," I agreed. He looked up at me, his expression a complex mixture of emotions. "Did you plan this? Was it all some elaborate setup?" "No," I said honestly. "When you made that joke, I was as humiliated as I've ever been. But it was also clarifying. I realized I'd been complicit in my own erasure. I'd allowed myself to become invisible, even to you. Especially to you." "So what happens now?" he asked. Closed my laptop. "Now we both go to work for the same company. You continue doing what you do well. I do what I do well. And we figure out if our marriage can survive honesty." "You think I can't handle a successful wife?" "I think you've never had to try," I replied, "but I'm willing to find out if you can." David was silent for a long moment. The announcement said effective tomorrow morning. "You're really doing this?" "I really am." He nodded slowly. "Then I suppose congratulations are in order." He hesitated, then added, "You'll be good at it. Better than most of us, probably." It wasn't exactly an apology, but it was an acknowledgement. It was a start. I left him in the kitchen and climbed the stairs to check on the children. Emma was asleep, textbooks still scattered across her bed, preparing for her debate even in dreams. Tommy had fallen asleep with his headphones on, his science project materials organized neatly on his desk. I gently removed the headphones and pulled his comforter higher around his shoulders. These two beautiful people were the reason I'd stepped back from corporate life. Not because I couldn't handle both, but because I'd chosen to give them my full presence during their formative years. I regretted nothing about that choice. But now, with Emma in high school, and Tommy close behind. It was time for them to see another side of their mother. Time for them to know that women didn't have to choose between family and ambition. They could redefine success on their own terms. The next morning, I was up before dawn. I showered, dressed in a charcoal suit I'd kept in the back of my closet, and made coffee. David came down as I was scanning email on my phone. "Early start," he commented, his voice still rough with sleep. "New CEO has to set an example." I replied without looking up. He poured himself coffee and leaned against the counter. "I've been thinking about what you said." I set my phone down, giving him my full attention. "You're right," he continued. "I stopped seeing you years ago. I built this image of who you were, what you wanted, and never bothered to check if it was accurate. And now? Now I'm looking at a stranger who happens to be my wife of 15 years, and my boss." He attempted a smile. "It's disorienting." "For me too," I admitted. "The thing is," he said carefully, "I like what I'm seeing. This version of you. She's formidable." "I've always been formidable, David. You just preferred me diminished." He winced. "That's fair, and not flattering to me." Emma appeared in the doorway, her school uniform slightly rumpled, her eyes widening at the sight of me in business attire. "Mom, what's going on?" "I have a new job," I said, smiling at her. Confusion. "I'm going to be running Daddy's company." "What?" She looked between us. "Is this a joke?" "No joke," David confirmed. "Your mother is the new CEO of Sterling Financial, or whatever it's going to be called now." "Blackwell Sterling," I said. "The board approved the name change last night." Emma's mouth fell open. "But you're a mom." "I'm many things," I told her, touching her cheek gently. "Being your mother is the most important, but it's not the only thing." "Does this mean you won't be home when I get back from school?" "Some days, yes, but we'll adjust. And you might find you like having a CEO for a mother." She considered this, her quick mind already adapting. "Can I put this on my college applications? Under parent occupations?" I laughed. "Absolutely." Tommy stumbled in next, stopping short at the sight of all of us gathered in the kitchen so early. "What did I miss?" "Mom's a CEO now," Emma informed him. "Cool," he said, heading straight for the refrigerator. "Can we get a better Wi-Fi router? The one we have keeps dropping connection." And just like that, life rearranged itself around this new reality. I addressed the audience not as David's wife, but as the woman who now held the top position in the very company where I had been belittled minutes earlier. Their expressions were priceless. Shame, awe, disbelief. David couldn't even look me in the eye. He was pale, frozen, like a statue carved from arrogance and shattered pride. I didn't insult him back. Didn't need to. My presence was enough. My title was enough. I had reclaimed my narrative, and no one would ever reduce me to just a housewife again. That morning, I walked into Sterling Financial, now Blackwell Sterling, with my head high. The security guard who had always greeted me with casual indifference on the rare occasions I'd visited David's office now straightened as I approached. "Good morning, Ms. Blackwell Miller," he said, holding the door. "Good morning, Frank," I replied, reading his nameplate. "How's your daughter doing at Boston College?" He blinked in surprise. She's doing great, ma'am. Thank you for asking." I smiled and continued to the elevator. Every person matters. Every role has dignity. These would be the first principles of my leadership. In the executive suite, Gerald was waiting, a stack of folders in his arms. "The team is assembled in the conference room," he said, and the press release went out at 7. I nodded, taking the folders. Thank you, Gerald. I'm ready. As I pushed open the conference room doors and faced a table, full of men in suits, men who had laughed at David's joke the night before, I felt not triumph, but purpose. This wasn't about revenge. It was about restoration, about stepping fully into who I had always been, even when hidden from view. Good morning, gentlemen, I said, taking my place at the head of the table. Let's begin. That night changed everything, not just for the people in that room, but for me. I had hidden behind the curtain for too long, letting others speak louder, stand taller, and take credit for stability I had built quietly. Now I stood in the spotlight, and I didn't flinch. 6 months after taking the helm at Blackwell Sterling, I sat in my corner office overlooking Boston Harbor. The morning sun glinted off the water, painting golden streaks across the polished surface of my desk. On the wall hung framed photos of Emma and Tommy, alongside my Wharton diploma that I'd finally retrieved from the attic. My father's favorite quote was mounted beside them. Power isn't about being seen, it's about seeing clearly. A knock at the door interrupted my thoughts. Come in, I called. Lisa Chang, my newly appointed COO, entered with a tablet in hand. At 48, Lisa had been overlooked for promotion at Sterling for years, despite her brilliant financial strategies. She had been one of my first executive appointments. The quarterly reports are in, she said, sliding the tablet across my desk. We're up 17%. I scrolled through the figures, nodding with satisfaction. The European expansion is moving faster than projected. Your mother called, Lisa added. She says to remind you about dinner tonight. Something about celebrating 6 months of I told you so. I laughed. My mother, Eleanor Blackwell, had been quietly urging me to return to business for years. When I'd finally called to tell her about taking over Sterling, she'd simply said, "About time." Behind her cool exterior, though, I knew she was pleased. She'd be even more pleased when I told her tonight about our plans to acquire Morton Financial next quarter. Thanks, Lisa. Anything else? David's waiting in the small conference room. The merger team is ready when you are. I nodded, gathering my notes. I'll be right there. The dynamics with David had evolved in ways neither of us could have predicted. After the initial shock wore off, he had surprised me with his adaptability. He'd always been brilliant at acquisitions, a skill that transferred well to our expanding portfolio. We'd established clear boundaries. At work, I was CEO and he was head of acquisitions. At home, we were partners and parents. It hadn't been easy. There were nights of tense silence, days of awkward adjustments. But there were also moments of rediscovery, like when he'd found my old business journals and stayed up all night reading them, or when he'd shown up at my office with lunch and simply said, "I'm proud of you." Our marriage had been rebuilt on a foundation of mutual respect, something that had been missing before. We saw each other clearly now, strengths, flaws, ambitions, and all. I made my way to the conference room, pausing briefly at my assistant's desk. James, can you make sure the children's events are on my calendar? Emma has a debate tournament next Tuesday, and Tommy's science fair is Thursday afternoon. Already done, he assured me, and I've arranged for the car to take you to both. Balance. That was the word that defined my new life. Not the illusory work-life balance that corporate America dangled like a carrot, but a genuine integration of all parts of myself. CEO, mother, wife, daughter, mentor. No single role defined me, but together they created the whole. In the conference room, David was mid-presentation, his sleeves rolled up as he gestured toward a projection of Morton Financial's assets. He paused when I entered, acknowledging me with a nod before continuing. The rest of the team straightened subtly in their chairs. I took my seat and listened, asking pointed questions when appropriate. This was one of the unexpected pleasures of my new position. Engaging. Fully with smart, capable people without dimming my own light. After the meeting, David lingered as the others filed out. "Good presentation," I said, gathering my notes. "I learned from the best," he replied with a hint of a smile. "Dinner tonight at your mother's?" 7 o'clock. Tommy needs a ride to soccer first. "Already planned for it," he assured me. "Oh, and Catherine?" I looked up. "Yes?" "Claire Reynolds called. She wanted to know if you'd speak at the Women in Finance conference next month." Claire, the woman who'd briefly befriended me at the company party before the revelation of my identity. She'd reached out several times since, clearly eager to establish a connection with the new me. "Tell her I'll consider it," I said. "But I'd rather focus on our mentorship program for now." David nodded, understanding. I'd launched an initiative to identify promising women in middle management and provide them with direct executive mentoring. It wasn't about optics or ticking diversity boxes. It was about creating pathways for talent that had previously been overlooked, just as I had been. Back in my office, I found an email from Richard, the silver-haired executive who had laughed so heartily at David's joke about me being a housekeeper. He was retiring next month and wanted to have lunch before he left. I typed a polite acceptance. There was no malice in my heart toward him, or any of the others who had dismissed me. Their limited vision had been a reflection of their own biases, not my worth. My phone buzzed with a text from Emma. "Crushed the practice debate. Coach says I'm ready for regionals. P.S. Can I use the story about you taking over Dad's company for my college essay on overcoming obstacles? Too savage?" I smiled and texted back. "Definitely too savage. How about dinner tomorrow, just us? We can brainstorm essay topics." Another message popped up, this one from Marcus Chen. "Saw the quarterly reports. Told you so. Lunch next week?" I responded with a thumbs-up emoji and a suggested time. Marcus had been instrumental in helping me transition back into corporate leadership, providing insights and support without ever saying, "I told you so." At least, not to my face. The afternoon passed in a blur of meetings, calls, and decisions. At 5:30, I closed my laptop and prepared to leave, a boundary I'd established from day one. I might check email after the children were in bed, but these evening hours belonged to family. As I gathered my things, James appeared in the doorway. "The Boston Business Journal is on line 1. They want a quote about the Women in Leadership article." "Tell them I'll call back tomorrow," I replied. "And James, go home. Whatever's left can wait until morning." He smiled gratefully and disappeared. Another boundary I'd set, reasonable hours for my staff. Productivity didn't increase with exhaustion, it decreased. That was a lesson the old Sterling had never learned. In the elevator, I checked my reflection in the mirrored wall. The woman looking back at me was confident, composed, complete. She wore her power not as armor, but as a natural extension of herself. This was who I had always been, even when I was just raising children, just managing a household, just supporting a husband's career. The difference was that now, everyone else could see it too. David tried to apologize on the ride home from my mother's dinner. I listened, but my silence said more than words. I wasn't angry anymore. I had outgrown him. The same way I had outgrown the version of myself that once waited for recognition from others. "You never really needed my apology, did you?" he asked quietly as we pulled into our driveway. "I considered this." "I did once," I admitted. "That night at the party, when you humiliated me in front of everyone. I wanted nothing more than for you to realize how much your words hurt. But now?" I shook my head. "Now I know that your words only had the power I gave them." "You're remarkable," he said. And for the first time in years, I felt he truly saw me. Inside, the house was quiet. Emma was studying in her room, Tommy already asleep. I kicked off my heels and padded to the kitchen, pouring a glass of water. The refrigerator was covered with family photos, school schedules, and now, newspaper clippings about Blackwell Sterling's remarkable growth under new leadership. The next morning, headlines spread across the corporate world. Unknown heiress shocks industry with takeover. But I was never unknown. I was simply underestimated. And that's the last time anyone would make that mistake. I carried that knowledge with me into every boardroom, every negotiation, every school event, every family dinner. It informed how I led, how I parented, how I loved. I no longer needed external validation to know my worth, and in that certainty, I found a power greater than any corporate title could confer. 6 months after that fateful night, I received an invitation to speak at Harvard Business School. The topic: Invisible Leadership, Success Beyond the Spotlight. As I prepared my speech, I reflected on the journey that had brought me here. I thought of the women like me, managing households with CEO-level skills but assistant-level recognition. I thought of the talent hidden in plain sight in companies around the world. I thought of my daughter, growing up watching her mother reclaim her power, and my son, learning that strength comes in many forms. My father had built his empire in the shadows, preferring to operate behind the scenes. I had inherited that preference for quiet influence, but I'd learned that sometimes stepping into the light wasn't about seeking glory. It was about illuminating the path for others. The morning of my Harvard speech, I stood at my bedroom window, watching the sunrise paint the Boston skyline in shades of gold and promise. David appeared behind me, wrapping his arms around my waist. "Nervous?" he asked. "No," I replied truthfully. "For the first time in my life, I know exactly who I am and what I have to say." He kissed my cheek. "The world better listen up then." Smiled, meeting his gaze in the window's reflection. "They will." And they did, because the woman they hadn't seen coming was now impossible to ignore.